All right, welcome everyone to Miracle Monday. And today we are very pleased to announce our guest, who is Liz Cronkite. Um, Liz, a Course in Miracle student and teacher, which is a non dualistic path to inner peace. Liz lived consciously with spirit for over 3 decades. And then, in a moment she calls the break, the experience of existence she knew fell away, taking with it the life she had been living. She had shifted into spirit consciousness, using the 6 stages of the development of trust that a course student can expect to pass through. Liz shares how she first found fulfillment as a person living with spirit, and then, through the vision of unity of a holy relationship, came to know Christ, God's extension, as herself after a long and difficult ego death. So welcome, Liz, and the floor is yours. I'm going to put everybody here on mute.
Um,
Okay,
Record.
and we're on record, I do believe, aren't we? Yes, we are.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Liz. You're going to take yourself off mute.
there you go.
Here we go.
Now we got it.
We're straightened out here now.
Good morning and afternoon, and to those of you in Europe, good evening as well. Thank you, Lloyd and Stephanie, for having me. They've asked me to discuss the 5th stage of the development of trust in the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles, which is called the period of unsettling. Before I do that, I'll tell you a bit about myself and my relationship with the Course and what I do. I became a student of the Course 40 years ago this June. I have been teaching the Course for 24 years, and I have been a life coach and mentor, primarily for students of A Course in Miracles, for 18 years. I've written several books, including translating the Course into plain language, and a memoir that describes my spiritual path and much of what I'm about to share today. You can learn more about me and my books and what I do at my website, acimmentor.com. Today, I'm going to discuss enlightenment and the ebb and flow of ego. I've come to prefer the word enlightenment to awakening, because enlightenment implies that the light has come, and I've discovered that no part of reality, also known as God, sleeps, so no part of reality awakens. Ego is perpetually asleep because it is the experience of existence that denies reality. So if there's an awakening, well, it's a rude one for ego, and this brings us to the period of unsettling, the 5th stage in the development of trust. The term unsettling is very much an understatement. Now, I'm not sure, but I think I'm the only teacher who says this. I've come to see that the Course is specific to Helen Schucman and Bill Thetford in their special function of taking down the Course, and it is meant to be generalized by the rest of us. I always found the language to be rather idiosyncratic, like spirit is when it speaks to us individually because our minds are distinct. It is why the Course leads us to and drops us off with spirits, because we're going to have a highly individualized curriculum. And that's what it was for Helen and Bill. Helen, as you probably know, didn't practice the Course, but Bill did. He was the first student. He put the workbook into practice, and his path up to his death is described in the Course. The Course implies that if you remove all grievances, you will see the real world, and then God will take the last step. It is implying a cause and effect that is not there. And this clearly does not happen for everyone who comes to see the real world. But this is what happened for Bill. So I'm cautious about taking anything in the Course literally for myself. However, I find the development of trust to be written so vaguely that it is easy to generalize, and I use those stages as chapters when writing my memoir. There are 6 stages in the development of trust, but in fact, the 6th stage doesn't describe a process like the others, but rather the state of peace that the others lead up to. I found that the first 4 stages described my process of becoming spirit-centered in ego consciousness, and the 5th one, the period of unsettling that I will discuss today, describes ego falling away. I suspected that would be the case because the period that precedes the period of unsettling, which is called the period of settling, describes a time of rest, but you're also warned to be wary of thinking you are further along than you are. For me, this showed up as being aware that no real shift had yet occurred in my consciousness. I was aware of spirit. I had recourse to spirit. I had made spirit my constant companion in the sense of guide and teacher and therapist, but there had been no fundamental change in my consciousness and experience. I was aware of what that was to look like because I had mystical experiences that showed me spirit consciousness. When I became a student of the course, I now know too, from recovered memories, that when I was around 7 or 8, I lived in what I think of as a kind of state of grace with spirit here on and off for a couple of years. The description of the period of unsettling basically says ego conflated truth and illusion. And as it values illusions, it considers losing them to be a sacrifice. It says you must learn to put aside all judgment, which really means ego must fall away, and that this will be difficult, but you will be supported. My experience of existence began to shift in 2011 when during a regular meditation, I quietly became aware that the enlightened mind was here. I didn't have to attain it. It was already here, whole and complete. Now, I'd had experience of spirit right here before, and briefly and infrequently in meditations. But this time, the awareness that it was here and that I didn't have to do anything to attain it remained. But I was also aware of something in me that continued in the process. I mistakenly thought that something had to catch up with the enlightened mind, and that this was healing the mind. In time, though, I realized that that something was ego and that it was never going to catch up with spirit. It would have to fall away. Still, ego and its spiritual process continued to dominate my mind, even though spirit was now always here. I have since learned that the first stage of enlightenment is commonly described not as the absence of ego, but as an awareness of something ever present here. I call it spirit. Some call it the divine or love. Susan Siegel called it the vastness. When enlightenment begins, this ever presence is here, no matter what else is occurring, even when you sleep. I do not mean it's there in your dreams, but you're aware that when you sleep, something constant that is there, that is here before, during, and after sleep never went to sleep. I don't recall if I had that experience at that point. It was there for sure later. But after the experience of realizing that the enlightened mind is here, ego became increasingly uncomfortable over the next few years. And around 10 years ago, I became aware that something significant had happened. Something had changed. And this is where in my memoir, I put the point that I entered the period of unsettling. Before I go further into what occurred from then on, I want to discuss how this experience was different from my previous 2 episodes of mystical experiences and experiencing the presence of spirit here for a time as a small child and young adult. Those episodes occurred in the context of ego, and after them, life went on as before. I was certainly changed, but ego remained the center of consciousness here. Spirit did not become an ever-presence in my awareness. But this time, what was different from those times was spirit has taken center here, and ego life is not going to resume. Because of these different experiences with ego ebbing and spirit being here, when I hear others discuss mystical experiences or shifts that they think may be enlightened, I listen and wait for a long while, because I found that while spirit is a constant and still presence in consciousness, ego ebbs and flows. So when ego ebbs, spirit seems to emerge in conscious awareness out from behind it. And then usually ego flows back into conscious awareness and spirit is covered over again. The reason ego ebbs and flows is because it isn't real. So it is unstable. I'm not talking about psychological or emotional instability. I mean, ego is incapable of stillness and consistency. In some minds, of course, ego dominates for an entire life. In most, it ebbs a bit here and there. And sometimes, in some, it ebbs far enough for spirit to fully emerge for a while before ego flows back in, as in my early experiences. And for many of those living on a spiritual path, which means many of you, ego may go into a persistent ebbing, never flowing back to a point where spirit is entirely covered again. And a person lives in a spirit-centered life. This is how I lived before the shift in consciousness. And rarely, there are those of us for whom ego falls away and never flows again. That would be the shift in consciousness. This ebbing and flowing of ego is the atonement unfolding in consciousness. Ego does not ebb and flow consistently in all minds, but where it ebbs, to whatever degree, the atonement is manifesting. Because truth ultimately undoes illusion, and that is the atonement. And I'm talking about the big picture here over the course of a life. We're all aware of the ebb and flow of ego in our minds on a smaller scale, as like when we have an ego backlash, when ego seems to come back hard into your mind after spirit has inspired an answer or a new perspective, or you've been aware of its presence in some way. So the same thing is going on a larger scale. Ego's instability means it shows up inconsistently, allowing spirit to emerge here and there within a single life and in consciousness as a whole. Now I'll go back to what occurred when I entered the period of unsettling. Once the enlightened mind was here, it was the beginning of the end for ego, so it was growing increasingly uncomfortable. The perspective of the entries in my journal changed immediately. I was seeing things from a larger perspective, an expanded view, as though I had stepped back and could see the big picture. I wrote things like there was a change in the landscape of my mind. But the point at which I felt I entered the period of unsettling was when I felt I had left a shack and entered a mansion, even though I was still only in the foyer. I began to have new experiences, like feeling I was a ghost in the world and couldn't touch the world anymore. I felt that I was really elsewhere. This was this consciousness registering the presence of spirit, which is elsewhere and not in the world. I felt a new dimension around me and that I was non-local. I couldn't place myself. I felt everywhere. This was fascinating, but not comfortable. These experiences made ego ride. When I had these realizations and experiences, ego would say, "This means I'm dead." I eventually became aware of a place in my mind that was barren, not like a desert, which has some life, but more like the moon, completely lifeless. This wasn't my whole experience, just a place in my mind that was there sometimes when I was quiet. Increasingly, my spiritual practices were no longer a comfort to me. I seemed to forget what was comforting to me in the idea of God. All that I had heard about God as emptiness suddenly seemed to be true. I continued to teach as always, which says something about what has always been teaching through me. This unfolded over years. And then in the spring of 2017, I became aware of a delicious spaciousness in my mind. This spaciousness would run in the back of my mind when I was engaged in some quiet activity. And then in the summer of that year, the golden light of Christ burst into my mind. It had been decades since I had any mystical experiences, except maybe a few oneness experiences here and there. The return of this light, which I knew from when I first became a student of the course, was what I'd always wanted and had expected would return someday. I had not thought of it as enlightenment. I just wanted the love of God that I had experienced when I was younger to return. And here it was, wonderful, but disconcerting because I knew something big was going on. In some ways, I downplayed it to myself, like, haha, this is only going to be an easy slip into a lovely state. But I was anxious. I went through a burst of creativity and wrote 2 novels, love stories that were metaphors for me of what was occurring. None of what I was actually experiencing was conveyed in the novels. I had never experienced anything like it. I was caught up on a wave. After the first novel, the mystical experiences subsided, but I felt in the middle of something significant. I knew nothing would be the same again. Things were quiet for a few months, but the following spring, it started up again. I had more new experiences, like a feeling of something huge over me. It was like my world was cracking open. I found myself in a holy relationship and had to tell my wife. I was really, really hoping that this was just something rocking my marriage, but I knew it was not. Now I knew for sure something big was happening. Something had ended and something new had come. I knew I was going to go through something rough for an indefinite time and that it was inevitable and I could do nothing about it but write it out. So I committed to not resisting and making it worse. That was all I could do. Without putting it to myself this way, I knew this was ego death, and I realized something very uncomfortable, that I had no idea what that really was. I was completely out of my element. Nothing was familiar anymore. And then in May of 2018, I had a moment I called the break. Something fell away, and I felt I shot upward in consciousness. And from then on, I felt I was in a new context, a new dimension. Whatever else came, and it was to become very dark, that new context was always around me, no matter what was happening, even when I slept. It was what got me through. Where the Course says this stage would be hard indeed, if not heavily reinforced, Spirit's ever presence was the reinforcement. But let me tell you, it was hard indeed, but it was not impossible because the difficulty was surrounded by Spirit. I always knew I would come out the other side. I just didn't know how long it would take. Just to be clear, all the drama I've shared and am about to share belongs to ego. The great difficulty, the sense of a hugeness over me, my world cracking open, that's ego's perspective. Something that has been cleared up in this process is I used to think that there was a neutral consciousness here that chose between ego and spirit. But I've since learned that consciousness is an empty space. The space I first felt as barren, which was ego's perspective, and later as delicious, which was spirit's perspective. Consciousness, which is represented here by this neutral person, has no agency of its own, no I of its own. It merely registers the presence of either ego or spirit. And they've been sorted as they've been sorted out. I experience them almost like two beings in this space that never intersect and only experience themselves. So consciousness registers either ego experiencing ego or spirit experiencing spirit. The I here is whichever is present, and that can vacillate depending again on the ebb and flow of ego. So all the discomfort I'm reporting was ego experiencing ego. After the break, my personal life was over and came apart. I left a happy marriage, my home, my dogs. I now know the break was the moment ego was bumped out of the center of this consciousness and was replaced by spirit. From then on, ego was falling away. What was broken in that moment was ego's denial of God. With spirit here in conscious awareness, ego's denial of God, of reality, could not stand. Ego's foundation was shattered. This consciousness was consciously registering a new experience of existence, and that is spirit. One of the first things that I noticed was while I still learned things in the sense of discovering information, all sense of learning that leads to a sense of personal growth was gone. There was nothing here anymore to grow. That was a neutral experience. But the worst thing for ego was not recognizing anything in this mind. The Liz it had made, which apparently was to deny God, was gone, which is why her life fell away. Spirit was here, but ego could never access it anyway, and certainly couldn't now. But the illusion that it could, which had resulted in the spiritualization of itself, was gone. And ego pushed away experiences that were spirit, saying they were ego, that it was the old Liz trying to reassert itself. This left Liz feeling very weak, not physically, but in character. It was a long while before this was sorted out, and I discovered ego was both more than I thought and less than I thought. It was more than I thought because what I thought was neutral consciousness turned out to be ego. But ego was also less than I thought because it claimed everything in consciousness for itself, including spirit. Ego falling away resulted in copious amounts of processing. There was no peace of mind to be had. I spent hours a day writing in my journal as a pressure release for the next few years. This came in useful later on when I wrote the memoir, however. For ego, it got very dark, and this continued to dominate this consciousness. It is delusional to believe an illusion is real, and ego was exposed as insane. There was terrible fear here, horror. Everything about ego was seen and experienced graphically by ego. Ego faced its guilt and hatred and rage and its rejection of love in their purest forms. Ego continued to be ego. It didn't change. It continued to deny reality, to assert itself and consciousness as reality. When it did, I experienced a great deal of disorientation. It felt like insanity.
Mhm.
I was told by a couple of sources that when something like the break occurs, the momentum of ego continues and takes time to wind down. And that is what has occurred. But at first, ego was still so powerfully in my conscious awareness that it was more like it had wound up than wound down.
Mhm.
By the way, no one around me knew I was going through this. The worst of this happened during the COVID shutdown, and I was living with my sister, which was helpful because it gave me a distraction. But no one in my family understands my spirituality, so I've never shared it with them. I just wrote this out, sharing with clients and readers and one or two teachers a couple of times. The worst of it took 2.5 years. And then there came a glimmer of light, what I call a cosmic chuckle, which came from a place within I'd never felt before. I finally had hope. It was still rough and for quite some time, but it got steadily better from that point. In the past couple of years, I've gone through a life review as well as an ego review. The past year in particular has been much better, as the power of ego has wound down considerably. Ego has not changed, but it has shrunk and grown weaker. And this has allowed spirit to emerge from behind it. I'm still experiencing ego, consciousness, and spirit being sorted out. But I have, with much relief, found that spirit was already here a great deal before the break. So I have not lost everything familiar. Now, when spirit is here, it is all that is here, and anything else is seen to be a meaningless appearance, an illusion. I've had lovely glimpses of what is to come, and lately I feel the complete death of ego near. It's like it has reached a dead end. There's no future for it. While for spirit, there is only now, and the future is the same, only now. I have moments, often when with others, when the bottom drops out, and I see in a very matter-of-fact way that this world is not real. This, of course, is when spirit is here in this consciousness. Last week, I had a moment on the edge of entering spirit consciousness, and I felt the support of the legions who have gone before me in this process. But then I saw that they are an illusion too, because what we see on the other side is only one. This showed me that this process that I have described today belongs only to ego. It has been an illusion too. All that I have described to you has been an illusion of the death of an illusion. Also last week, I felt something I've not felt since this began: relief. I saw that I will be happy that none of what I had thought was reality will remain. I know from experience that these glimpses are what will unfold in the next months and years. And that will be the final period of development, achievement. What I want you to take away from this talk is that enlightenment is not what ego thinks it is. It is not desirable for ego. In fact, it is ego's worst nightmare. I'm not saying this to scare you, but to prepare you if you are to go through it. Most of you will not, but don't feel deprived either. It is also an illusion. And ego is not a mistake or wrong or bad, but simply false. The ebbing and flowing of ego is the expression of the atonement, is what consciousness is. So you are not failing when ego is here. You have an individualized curriculum. Your own expression of the atonement is unfolding. Find it by finding spirit and making it your teacher, your guide, therapist, your constant companion. As a teacher who is now post-atonement, I am here to support you in growing your awareness of spirit and walking your unique path. Thank you for listening today. And if anybody wants the transcript of this talk, just email me at liz@acimmentor.com.
Wow.
That was friggin' amazing. And I'm gonna tell you, it was needed at this time, Liz. There's a lot of people going through this now, and a lot of people think they're insane.
Yeah.
For me, it's been ongoing for about 18 years, so it's different for everybody, but your talk on this is it's a mind blower, and I think it's going to be very helpful for everybody here today. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And we've really certainly been, we've gone through it, both Lloyd and I, and are still going through it. If you know what I mean. I'm going through it intermittently since 2019. And I share just about my experience, because that's the only thing we can really share, right?
Mhm.
It's our own experience with it.
That's it.
Yeah.
But
So-
you made it very clear, and that's what I like. A lot of people don't want to speak about this stage. Now, Stephanie and I are a couple that do speak about it quite a bit. And we get a lot of, negative feedback from talking about it. But it needs to be talked about. This is a time when a lot of people are awakening and going through this fifth stage. And
Right.
it can be a long stage.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, for each individual what it's going to happen, but it's definitely not hearts and flowers.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Far
Yeah.
from it. I just want to share one idea that we received a little while ago, Liz, and just to see what you think of it. Then we'll go and then we'll address any questions that anyone happens to have for Liz. Liz, a couple of months ago, we had a beautiful brother of ours did a talk. His name is Luigi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. It's Louis Miguel Falcao. And he suggested or revealed an idea he had about the fifth stage of the development of trust, specifically the eye of the needle. And the way he described it was that we go through the stages during this particular lifetime review. So let's just say, okay, so I've been going through the 6 stages around a circle. So it's a spiral.
Like a spiral.
So I go through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then at the top of the spiral, I'm going to go through stage 5 for the final time. And this is the eye of the needle, or the death of the ego. And again, like you reiterated, we're not all going to go through it in this lifetime review. We may have gone through it before, we may be going through it, some other time. And of course, the mind has already decided when this is going to happen. I just wondered if you had any feedback about that, about about the spiral concept. It made sense to me.
Well, I'd say each stage contains all the other stages.
Right.
So when so that's how I see it, is that when I went through undoing, I wouldn't have been aware of it way back then, but I would have gone through all of those stages. And then the next thing I'd be into the second stage, and that would contain, in a sense, a micro version of all of those stages. So in the bigger stage, each stage contains the other stages.
Right.
And then you reach the period of, well, this stage, the period of unsettling, which is the fifth one. And I'm sure that if I stopped to analyze it, I would see that I've been going through, at the beginning was like the undoing, and then I'm in the sorting out, and then, I'm
Right.
somewhere in that now, and at the end, I'll probably have a conjunction of unsettling and unsettling, right before I would move into achievement, I would imagine, which I'm not looking forward to because, but actually, to tell you the truth, at this point, I'm sure I'm through the worst of it, the darkest, because darkness means a lot of unknowing, a lot of not seeing what's really going on and not being sure. And I think I could go through some more discomfort, but I don't think I could go through the kind of discomfort I've just come through. Again, I just don't think it's there to go through.
You know, a lot of people experience this as absolute terror.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
terror is the word, right? We've talked to people who have said they felt that they were being consumed by a vampire. And I get that. I totally can relate to that. Or that every bit of insanity or every bit of sanity was being sucked out of their mind. Totally get it.
And you know what? And all of this is ego. This is ego. This is ego responding to the presence of the light and seeing its own death and frankly being exposed as everything it is. Its
Right.
denial of God means it has to deny what it is, because I mean, when you think about it, when you're in denial, you deny you're in denial, right? Otherwise, you'd know you were in denial and you wouldn't be in denial anymore.
Exactly.
So that's what ego does. That's what I discovered the moment of the break. What had happened was ego's denial of God was gone. Therefore, ego couldn't deny itself to itself anymore either. It's all of its masks were pulled off. It was completely exposed.
Right.
Its delusion, it's that the fact that it's delusional was exposed because it believes an illusion is real. And so that's all the insanity, my biggest thing was the disorientation I'd have, not knowing what was real. I would just feel this dizzy disorientation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And just have to wait for it to pass and know that ego was feeling completely disoriented and it wasn't real, it wasn't me, and it would pass, and it always has. And
Yes.
each time I go through that, it seems ego's a bit more weakened. The big difference between before the shift and now is ego didn't diminish before. I mean, it diminished in each episode in the sense it would kind of wind down, but overall it never diminished. But since the break, when I go through these episodes with ego, each time it is weaker. The power of it is weaker, and it seems kind of shrunken and weaker to me.
Right.
It doesn't change, which is fascinating. It's exactly as it always was, but its power diminishes. That's what's winding down is the power, and then in contrast, of course, spirit is emerging more. So as ego's power diminishes, ego is just expanding more in this space, and it becomes much easier to see through ego and to write it out, and the time span of episodes with ego shorten.
That's
Yeah,
excellent.
one thing that I've experienced just in the last month, I've had a lot of light episodes happening. And also what you were talking about, for me, I get the vertigo.
Yeah.
Usually when I go to bed at night and when I get up in the morning, it only lasts for a couple of minutes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Liz, I really can appreciate and relate to what you were referring to when you say you just have to go through it, because it's like when the eye of the needle has you, it has you. And something Lloyd says, it's sort of jokingly, but I mean, it's true. We have to ride the bronco because the Holy Spirit seems unavailable during those times. And now I know the Holy Spirit is always available, but the decision maker has been blocked by the ego during certain times, and therefore we are completely mindless in ego identification. This to me is the eye of the needle. It's just this pure, um, there's just this pure resistance that comes up, and you just can't get out of it for a certain period of time.
Right. Yeah. When ego's wound up, there's nothing you can do but let it have its way,
Right.
and just let it and not resist it, which would only, make it worse and empower it more. To just
Yeah,
let it out.
that's the
Yeah.
secret. Yeah.
That's a very good.
It's just to observe it.
Yeah. Just to let it go by. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think the instinct is to feel guilty. If you know what I
Mm.
mean, like the ego tries to make you feel bad for feeling extremely bad. And I mean, that's happened to me so many times, and you just get caught up in that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Guilt doesn't undo it. It just adds to it. It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing that I really liked what you said, Liz, was the fact that, spirit is always here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always here. And part of what's been revealed to me, it had been expanding in my awareness when I was still in ego consciousness. And part of what's been revealed is that how much it was really already here for me, already present in me. And that I went through, when this happened was one of the things, because nothing was familiar in my mind anymore. I also was questioning everything. And which is, and I think it's a good practice every now and then to question everything you've come to assume is, but I was just left floundering for such a long time with nothing here to hold on to. But I have since learned that a lot of what was already, a lot of it was already here. So a lot of the things that I questioned were things that are to remain. And so I've had the comfort of sort of reclaiming a lot of things that happened before the shift. That it was already here to a great extent. It was just this little, the final piece of ego, which was the denial of God had to be bumped out of the center of consciousness here. That denial of God had to go. And I've always been able to kind of sense there's more to be undone, more to be undone. I can feel it. I can feel the discomfort of ego.
Right.
And of course, that's why they call it the eye of the needle. We're just being squeezed
Yeah.
through that eye, get rid of all of the ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the other
So we
side.
can enter that state of not knowing. See
And,
that? Right?
the thing is that what I find in the course community with, a lot of course teachers, they don't like to discuss this. And
Yeah.
it's understandable because they haven't experienced it.
Oh yeah, if they haven't experienced it, and some aren't comfortable discussing the discomfort,
No.
Yeah.
because they feel there must be something wrong because I'm uncomfortable. You have to understand what's uncomfortable is ego,
Yeah.
and so that means you're actually on the right track.
Yeah.
If you're not uncomfortable, it's not to say you shouldn't have you shouldn't have times of peace or just when things settle down a bit, and that's that's natural too when you're consolidating your learning and ego's not particularly threatened. But through the whole process, the process is the false falling away. So the false is going to be very uncomfortable.
Right.
And yeah.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, we got a couple of hands up here now. So Doreen, you go ahead and unmute yourself, Doreen.
Yeah. Hi, Liz. Thanks for
Oh,
everything that you have been sharing just now.
you're welcome.
You mentioned the book by Susan Siegel. Is that Clash with Infinity? Collision with
Collision.
Infinity? Yeah, I read that book several times, also to prepare myself for what might happen in my own life. Thank you for mentioning the disorientation, by the way. I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah.
What I would like to ask is, have you experienced what Susan experienced when she stepped into the bus when she was a couple of months pregnant, and suddenly her awareness was about 3 feet behind her on the left side, and she was looking at her own body? I would like to know if you are familiar with such an experience, and if that belongs to the phase of the real world, entering the real world. How would you describe her experience when she stepped into the bus?
No, I've not had the experience of being outside my body and watching it. I've not had that experience. And I think it's just it's just the detachment and the way she experienced it, that the moment, because for her everything changed after that. And I think it was just that moment of something falling away, and her, it's finding herself in a different state, really. What she experienced, she just didn't have the context for the experience she was having the way we do, having been students of the course. And so she had reason to know. She had studied, transcendental meditation pretty intensely, and had been told about this, but she had basically forgotten it, and so didn't recognize what was occurring, and didn't realize the terror that she was to go on to feel, for the next 10 years or whatever, was ego, and was ego. And there was, and I think what really disturbed her was that inability to feel things as she had before. Um, and um, because she had no context for what was occurring. There was the vastness of her, which, I would call spirit. And, that was always there, but I don't think I think maybe she became more aware of that later. I think initially she was just feeling that something was gone, and she was just in this. And that was basically the ego screaming, something's gone, something's not the same here. And to me, I kind of equate it to the break, because I mean, that was what happened. The Liz that was here before. Well, Liz is neutral. She's a neutral expression of consciousness, but the way ego identified with Liz and used Liz was gone. That was the deny. That's how it denied God, was through that. And so I think if you're aware that these things can happen, then you have an advantage. And if you've already been developing a relationship with spirit, an awareness of it, which she hadn't been, she had put that aside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that helps you get
Thanks.
Okay, can we go on to the next question, Liz? Are you cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay, Mary, go ahead and unmute yourself. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Stephanie Lloyd. And Liz, wow. Oh, I love this triangular joining in this with you guys. This is actually relieving me of a little bit of the panic and fear of going through it. And Liz, when you said, you keep reminding, and this is what is helping me, is what is experiencing that panic and terror is ego. And if it's for me, there's like an aha light that's going on, that's going, that's why the awareness is so important, because if I can recognize and be aware that it's the ego and not it's the ego that's afraid of annihilation. I think you've when you said you went through it and you don't want to go through it again, it's like, well, what about us that are going through it? It's like, I want to back out. This is too painful. How can I go back to my happy place? How can I go back? And then Stephanie, when you said the mind has already decided the timing, it's like, this is not in my control anymore. It never was, but now I'm really aware of that this is just happening. And but it's the fear of it happening that's painful. So it's actually bringing up some joy in my heart, because I'm like, you know, what am I holding on to that's causing the fear? Because what I'm holding on to is what's trying to dissolve.
Right.
Isn't that the
and
point?
you're not holding on to it. Yeah. One of the things that I was trying to convey in that is, this is what consciousness is. It's a ego comes in and plays itself out. And most people that ends in the death of the body, but for some of us, it happens before the death of the body.
Right.
Ego would, of course, much rather go with the body, because then at least it could pretend that it goes on. But
that's good. That's good.
Right.
Thank you. Oh yeah.
So the fact the enlightenment is like its worst nightmare, because it's clear that it's nothing. It ends. If it dies with the body, it can say, "Oh, I'm going on to another life," or I'm gonna go to heaven. I mean, it can have these illusions, but when it goes with enlightenment, then it's worse to it than dying with the body. And so that's why it's so difficult. It's because it's basically watching itself die in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
So my question, my next question, because this is so helpful for those of us who are now aware that this is what's happening. It's like it eases something. It eases the there's nothing going wrong here. It's
Yes.
just happening, because I've been trying to tell myself that, but it's still my ego that's trying to convince me, because there's a part of me that goes, I'd rather die. I'm done. This is too painful. I'd rather die. Well, that's ego too,
Yes.
because then you just expressed it because you can go on. So I'm actually feeling this lightening up, and I'm wondering if this is possible. If I can come to this awareness and with Holy Spirit that this can be a joyful process, I really feel like there's joy. There's a part of me that's going, this doesn't have to be this painful. Can you, it's like when the ego gets out of the way, the joy comes in.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, this is
Yes,
great.
of course.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's always going to be a painful process for ego. That's what you have to understand. Ego
Right.
is what's dying away, and it's going to be a painful process for it no matter what. And what you want to become aware of is, again, just that observing that and watching that and knowing that's the ego going through that. Consciousness is just registering that ego is having this experience. And so you want to become aware of the space around ego, which is consciousness, and spirit in consciousness around ego. So, that's what you want to become. If for spirit, it's not that this is a joyful process. It's just that spirit is just joyful. You know what I mean? This process has no meaning to spirit. It's all something happening in consciousness, which is the illusion. It's everything happening here is symbolic. It's impossible for there to be an opposite of God. So this idea that there is only symbolic. The whole process of even ego falling away is symbolic. Process of spirit being here is symbolic. It's just a play of ideas. The idea of the opposite of God and the undoing of the opposite of God, right? And so for spirit, it's just nothing is really happening. It's ego's going through all of this mess, and it has no real meaning. If spirit doesn't feel anything about it, it's just watching ego as it watched it before, when ego thought it was ruled mind and thought it was real and thought it was reality. Spirit just watches that.
Yeah, that's perfect, Liz. And what I'm also hearing when you said spirit is joy. So the joy that I feel is the awareness, the observer.
It's just the presence of spirit. Yes, right. Yeah.
I'm just in that maybe I'm calling it joy, but it's not ego joy.
No.
Which is not.
It's just in that moment, spirit is present, ego isn't. And so therefore there's joy. It's the same way that, ego is fear. I mean, we say we're afraid of certain things, but ego is just fear. And then it projects the fear out there and says, oh, I'm afraid because of whatever situation. It's really just fear. It will feel fear no matter what, even without no situation going on in its life,
Thank you.
Let me interrupt you for just a second, Mary. You must understand that Mary's not really going through anything.
Right.
Because don't forget, and this is what is often forgotten, is that the ego made the body. It's a projection. And so what happens when you're undoing the ego uses its chosen home, which is the body, to project that terror in order to keep you, let's say, sustained in the body. It doesn't want you to go to spirit. So that's what's really, really happening. Mary can't be here because Mary's not here.
Right. But the ego wants to understand that, it's like, I can't do this intellectually anymore. It's helping so much. to I don't want to call it understand, but it's an awareness that maybe it's awareness. I'm like, oh, that's what's going on, and it's just some relief comes in because I've been told, for 6 years that this is not really happening, but my ego is arguing with that, and
Of
that,
course.
yeah.
And,
So
and
Yeah, and then you just have to recognize that what's resisting that idea is ego, and that's never going to change.
right.
There's never a point that ego is going to come around and say, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah."
Yeah, the
Exactly.
ego can't do it. Ego
I love it.
cannot do this. That's what's so hard for this in this. That's what's so painful in this stage, because the ego is going, I told you this was, it's like, well, look what you've done now. It's like, I don't know. There's a critter in there, and it's scary to think that it's going to just dissolve, and that what's going to happen to my family, my kids, my life, my body, which seems to be falling apart. But all that, when you said, that's still ego.
Yeah.
And it's not that I think I've asked for this enlightenment, and so I want to allow it now. And for me, it's easier to allow it if I just step back and watch the show and realize and laugh a little.
Because it is just happening. There is no choice here. There never has been.
Thank
You had an illusion of choice, and that's fallen away.
Yes.
There's no
Yeah.
decision to make. Everything is happening. It's just going to happen. And
Gotcha.
you're watching ego finish out its story, and spirit will emerge more from behind that, and it will, so every ego that you're watching, it's there to play a part, to have its story, to play it out to whatever degree it will.
Yeah.
And it'll experience the atonement to whatever degree it will, and then it will fall away. They're all just ideas,
Yeah.
playing out
Right.
in consciousness. Like I said, it's just symbolic. There's nothing real happening here.
That's very, very helpful. And one more question.
Well, I don't know. Have we got time?
He's just kidding, Mary. You go ahead.
I just like, it's something, it's just all wanting to come through. It's like, I want to take advantage of this. But one more question, and this is for all three of you, because you mentioned Bill and Helen did not practice the course, but Bill did.
Yeah.
And so in effect, what my understanding about Bill is that towards the end of his life, he had reached at the end of his life, he'd reached full forgiveness. And he started getting very quiet. He didn't even teach anymore. He just went and he was just there. And so is that kind of the thing? It's like he just didn't have to try anymore. He had reached a place of, he's just like a role model to me. It's like, I want to do it like Bill, because he he just got,
You know what? It will be what it will be. You just let it.
right.
You have to just let it unfold, right?
Yeah.
And let it come. Whatever comes naturally, right?
Okay.
And like I shared, I mean, one of the first things I noticed was gone was any sense of learning or growth.
That's excellent.
Excellent. Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
great conversation. Another point I just wanted to make was that now that the subject is coming to the surface, we're getting more people talking about it, which is good. Because when I started to go through this 19 years ago, I had no one to talk to.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Absolutely zero, except for David Hoffmeister. I contacted him at my worst state, and he got back to me like within 15 minutes after I called him. And he assured me that everything was going perfectly, that he'd gone through some of this himself. Now, he hadn't gone through as drastically as what I was going through, but he had gone through some of it. And it's different for all of us.
Right.
And I want to make it clear for anybody who might be a fairly new student to this. The early stages are also uncomfortable. I found the period of sorting out to be a long and difficult stage. It wasn't what we're talking about here today. That was all, a long and difficult stage.
Yeah.
So I'm only doing that because I just remembered wanting when I started out, I wanted to be further along than I was.
Right.
Exactly.
And so, I was always looking at, well, what stage is this? What stage? Because it was so uncomfortable. Well, it must be unsettling because it's so uncomfortable. But even though I kind of sensed I wasn't there yet, and it's just that it is if you are if this path is your genuine path for you from the beginning, it can be uncomfortable in many ways, and it is why I in my talk I talked about how I had two episodes in my life of mystical experiences when spirit was clearly here, and how this one was different from those. And then the difference was there was definitely a shift in consciousness, a lot of mystical experiences, and the awareness that life is not going to go on. The other times I just went back into a normal life. I was changed, but I had gone back into it. And this time that can't happen because the thing that was there before is gone. Thing that had gone
Ooh.
on with ordinary life is gone. So all that is gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and that can be kind of scary to this ego who goes, "You really want to lose all that?" But it's like I don't have a choice. It's like,
exactly, you don't. And that was why I felt it, I felt something big coming. I didn't know what it was going to result in, but everything fell away. My whole life fell away, and um there was a rightness to it. If there was a feeling of the rightness to it. And that it was time, but at the time, ego was, screaming at the same time, recognizing what what it meant, really, what that falling away meant, that this was really it. This was really the event it had been dreading, all along. Yeah.
And we really have to understand, Mary, that you're right. We absolutely have zero control. As the Course says, we have no control over the world we made.
yeah,
And I don't know how many of you guys have seen my experience about the two clouds when I was in British Columbia, but well, if you haven't, read that because it's amazing. That's how I was learned that we have no control over the world we made. It showed me, it gave
Yeah.
me absolute experience within the dream that I had no control over the world I made. And that's the absolute truth.
I just want to share this, and then we're going to get on to Doreen, and then
Yeah.
Tess. We have some golden hands up, Tess, and you're one of them. But I wanted to insert this just for anyone that hasn't heard a little bit. Ironically, the day I started going through the eye of the needle, which was in 2019, a friend of mine took a picture of me, which was on the top of, I was on top of a mountain with my hands out, beautiful sunny day, and I was like I was on top of the world. And before the end of that day, my whole life came crashing down.
Mm.
I started to go through the eye of the needle, and what it looked like for me in the very beginning was I just felt all this pressure around my head, and I didn't know what it was. And with that pressure was all this anxiety, and very intense fear started coming up, which was, I call it abstract fear because it wasn't specific. It just felt more abstract. And I asked the Holy Spirit what it was, and I heard the word subconscious. And,
wow.
and in that one word was my knowing that it was the unconscious guilt and fear was coming up with a vengeance. And then I heard the Holy Spirit say, the mind of God is here, and you're sliding into home base, which is when the ego screams the loudest. And then with that, I knew that I was going through something. I didn't know really what it was, but I knew that I was being supported. I knew that. And then it started. That was my first episode, which has been intermittent for, the past 5 years. But it started as I would wake up in the morning and I would be in what I explain as extreme terror. I was just,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I felt like I was being chased down, by
Yeah.
a pack of vampires.
And of course, that unconscious guilt and fear has nothing to do with Stephanie.
No.
That unconscious guilt and fear is the ego.
Yeah, so I was learning as I went. Liz, I don't know if you had that same experience, but I really didn't have a clue, but I learned as I went. And this is like at the end of stage 4, it says you will not go on from here without mighty support. And so, mighty companions showed up to help me. They were few and far between, but they did show up. And Lloyd was one of them, and another lady I knew was one of them. And so, like, all this reinforcement was there. And I'm not even saying that it made it that much easier because my level of terror was so intense that I developed a form of PTSD, post-traumatic distress disorder. It was absolutely horrific. So I just wanted to insert that in there just to show you that, I've been going through this on and off, and it's been an amazing learning experience for me. And for me, it's about letting go of everything that I think I know. Right? Like, it's like, the salvation is the release of concepts. Well, that's just in a sentence until you start to go through it. You're generally basically letting go of yourself. You're letting go of everything you think you know. You're letting go of every process that you think is going to help you. You're entering into this absolute state of not knowing. And, really, the mind goes through this kicking and screaming. No matter how evolved we might think we are, we're letting go of our self-concept in a way that is so profound and so deep. So I wanted to share that.
I just want to share one other thing before you take another question here, is that for me, it was all like mental at first when this started to happen. But you might say I conquered the mental part of it. I sort of became immune to the mental attacks. And now it's totally physical. I don't know if you've experienced that, Liz, at all, where you actually get physical attacks that you can't really explain.
No, I haven't had anything like that. I have all my ongoing health, health issues that you get as you're getting older, but they're nothing that I would. Obviously, there are times when something will act up, and it might coincide with me going through something's dark or something, and I'll know that that's probably feeding into it. But
Yeah.
I for me, it's been far more in my definitely in my mind more,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's what happened to me. Was for a number of years, it was all mental, but not anymore. I get just what I call instant physical attacks. They come and go and they last maybe 30 seconds and they're gone. It's weird.
Yeah.
You can't really explain it.
well,
Yeah.
I have felt it physically, certainly when I was going through all the fear. I mean, I have all the things that attend fear, the adrenaline, and then all the effects of adrenaline. And I was already familiar with that from panic attacks from earlier in my life. So I knew that process. In fact, it was helpful for me to recognize, wait a minute, a lot of what I'm feeling here is physical. This isn't, because when the adrenaline courses through you, you have a lot of physical symptoms, but there are also mental ones. Yeah, I mean, it affects the brain. Brain's getting washed with adrenaline or whatever. So I started to recognize that, to be able to started to sort out what was mental. I mean, what was physiological response to the fear, and what was the actual fear.
Right.
And then learning to just, okay, because I knew from my previous experiences with panic attacks how to deal with the adrenaline, the effects of the adrenaline. So it was, a lot of it has been sorting out, what is just the physiological process that's being kind of triggered by the experience of what's going on with me in my consciousness.
Okay, Doreen, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, first I want to thank you, Stephanie, for mentioning PTSD, because I'm very familiar with that. So I'm happy that you wanted to share that and mention that specifically. Liz, I'm about 1/3 into your book, A Memoir of Christ. And what I understand until now is that it takes great willingness to enter the real world. Could you expound on that a bit more?
Well, again, I can't. I mean, back in the day, I would have talked a lot about willingness, and I really felt I was making things happen through my willingness. And now I know that it happens. But I mean, I didn't do anything to make it happen. My willingness was actually the fact that it was going to show up, turning up. That's how it felt like willingness, but really it's what feels like our personal motivation is really the atonement moving through us. So what feels like our desire to do something, even to pick up a book or to meditate or to have a spiritual practice, is the atonement moving through us. It's not, I don't have a will apart from the whole, in other words. So even what I used to see as my willingness to have these experiences, I now realize was just the atonement moving through me. I had no control over that.
Ah,
Wow.
yeah. So what I understand from you, Liz, is that the great willingness is actually God's willingness imparted to us so we can go through the process.
Well, it's the way it's played. We feel it like I want this to happen, but it's really what we're feeling is it's happening. So we feel it as desire or we feel it as willingness, and it's really that it's happening, and that's what we're feeling. And then it gets kind of translated into this personal story, because consciousness, arose for ego to play out, and so it has the shape of an I and this personal story. But it's really just, it's the whole being played out through the individual. And so it comes to me as, I want this. I'm willing to have this happen, this openness, this great openness. Looking back, I can't take credit for any of the openness I felt. That was the movement of the atonement through me. Yeah.
Okay.
So the same thing for the blocks, therefore, where I felt I was blocked. It just really meant it wasn't time yet. And,
Wow. Thank you so much. Tess, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, yes. Okay, I lower my hand. Yeah, well, my question now is a little funny maybe, but it raised when Liz was talking about something, and then I thought, yeah, well, can you fool the ego?
Can you fool the ego?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking now here so seriously about the ego. I read the book Taking the Ego Lightly from Ken Wapnick. I read the title from Carol Ho, Never Forget to Laugh, from Bill Thetford. So my question is, I'm a very serious person, so everything is always very serious in my life. So is it possible to fool the ego? To say, you're not dying, just come along, but you're not dying.
No, because you have to understand what would say that. There are only two things here, ego and spirit. And to spirit, ego isn't real. So it doesn't care what ego's going through. Understand that what is suffering over ego is ego.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like they're two self-contained words, ego and spirit. And they never intersect. But the spirit is here and ego senses it, and so that's where it's reacting to it. But they don't intersect, and spirit knows ego isn't real. It's not at all concerned with what ego is going through, because it isn't real. So when you have that, never forget to laugh, the laughing, that's spirit recognizing this isn't real. It will take it lightly. It takes ego lightly. Ego will never take ego lightly. It's way too, involved with itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So the seriousness is always.
Yeah, I don't believe you, but that is not important, I guess.
Right.
It's just that every liberated being at some point in its evolution, if you want to call it evolution, nothing's really evolving here. But at some
Exactly, right. Because it's ego that goes through a process. Any process you're in is ego. What goes on a spiritual, the gateless gate. What goes on a spiritual journey reaches the gate, that's ego, only to realize that it can't go beyond the gate, and what's beyond the gate never went on a journey. And that's what I meant by the enlightened mind was here, and it didn't have to be attained. It was already here. Ego was something completely apart from it, going on its own little spiritual journey, totally unrelated to the truth. The whole sense of a process is ego. The whole sense of a journey is ego. And then it comes, the ending point is that realization that the enlightened mind is already here. It's never thought it was ego. It never went on a journey. It knows, it's always known the truth. Ego is just this, it's a totally false experience.
You
And
know-
that's, that's why you might see what the Course says is that we travel but in dreams while safe at home.
And I'll tell you
You're
another,
on a journey without distance to a place you never left.
Right.
But it's talking about two different things there.
Absolutely.
Ego's on a journey without distance. The thing that's never left God is spirit. They're two completely different things.
Exactly.
I love it. I love one passage from the Course that that always gave me a sense of freedom was that nothing this world believes is true has any meaning in his mind whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
I just feel like that's a very liberating statement.
It is. It's interesting. It's good that you see it that way. So many people tell me they feel abandoned. They feel abandoned by God.
Right.
And I'm like, well, yeah, because ego, ego is the state of abandonment of God, not by God.
Right.
I mean, it's something that is completely unconnected to God, that desperately wants God to recognize it and make it real. Like Pinocchio, wanting to be a real boy.
Right.
That's what ego is. It's desperately wants to be made real.
Right.
And it's nothing.
Right. And when we're going through the eye of the needle, we're really coming face to face with the fact that we don't want to lose our individuality.
That's ego that doesn't want to lose itself. Yeah. Yeah. It's
And of course-
existence, which is the sense of individuality. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our first ever grievance is the fact that, that God didn't honor our what would I say,
Death wish.
death wish, but our desire to be autonomous beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then yeah, that's ego. That's exactly what ego is. It's completely resentful that it's not recognized as real. Yeah.
Well, I gotta say, this to me, this is the best session. This is the most helpful session. I'm not going to say that we've ever had, but like for me right now where I am, it's deeply helpful. I'm really,
Good.
really grateful for everyone here for asking questions
Yeah.
because I love when people start asking questions because that to me really gets the ball rolling. So do we have time? Liz, how are you feeling?
We got
You know,
what it's-
yeah, I know, but I just wondered how you're feeling. Liz.
I'm fine. I've got a few more minutes before I have to go. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so we'll go ahead, Deb, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I put a question in the chat. Is ego ever joyful?
Right. No.
I
Well,
didn't-
yes. I mean, not truly joyful. It's happy when something
Right.
goes.
Is spirit always joyful?
Yes. But understand that when spirit's here, it's not like you go around joy, joy, joy all the time in ecstasy.
You're just
it's actually more of a quiet lightheartedness.
Yeah.
A very quiet lightheartedness.
I haven't found concordance with the eye of the needle in the course book. I'm just curious if that is a term used in the course book.
No, it's
I
no.
didn't think so. Okay, but I do understand it. Thank you.
Well,
so
this is what I
definitely
understand because from the Bible, and I'm not sure if this is where Stephanie's using it, but in the Bible, there's that thing about it's easier for a poor man to,
Yeah.
or than for a rich man, because there was this place in, I think, Jerusalem, what do you call it, a gate that you had to go through. It was very narrow, and the camels had to be unloaded. It was so narrow, the camels had to be unloaded before they could go through, because when they were laden down, they couldn't get through the needle.
Beautiful.
It was called the eye of the needle because it was a very narrow passageway.
Right,
And
that's
so it's kind of like, if you go through something narrow and you're kind of shredded as you go through, you know what I mean? You're getting shredded.
definitely.
And that's what it's.
Yeah,
And it does
Yeah.
say in the disappearance of the universe, it does say that Jesus went through the eye of the needle. It actually uses that
Where
term.
it came from. Yeah.
yeah. Now, Liz, you only got a couple of minutes. I'm wondering if you would mind. I'm going to read
Wait a minute,
something.
Audith had a question.
Yeah,
Can we just get that one?
We certainly can. And before you leave, I'm going to read a very quick something, which I feel is going to be really beneficial for, some of us here anyway. It's just it's a description of the eye of the needle from St. John of the Cross. And I feel like it'll be a good way to end this. Ardith, did you have a question?
Yes and no. So I decided I decided to just kind of take it all in and go ahead with proceeding what you're doing. I think it's more important to close on this kind of a note. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to just read this now and then we'll say goodbye to Liz. St. John of the Cross speaks about a key phase of our awakening, which is called the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle speaks to a specific transition that each mind will go through. It is not a test. It speaks to a deep and rare stage of what we could call the realization of Christed being. To throw out all the mind's crutches and enter the eye of the needle, the unknown and utterly unknowable, even as the reverberations of stuck and start disorientation and terror strikes from stem to stern. This is but a brief attempt at the taste of the eye of the needle. As for the eye of the needle, it awaits on the other side of all leaning on any kind of spirituality, conceptually, conceptually. There, when one truly surrenders into God, utterly and truly with empty hands, with no subtle hope of gaining anything, especially not safety, knowledge, or even hope. The eye of the needle arises when ego as identity has been transcended, with only a tiny thread left, the one attached to any and all thought systems and explanations, obstructing mind's greatest fear, which is not knowing. Beyond all hope in hope itself, beyond all dualities, these spheres obliterate it all. And what remains? Only one way to find out, and no one genuinely devoted to waking and transformation will avoid the eye of the needle in right time. Coming to love only God is the very gravitational pull that ensures its inevitable arrival. Yeah, so Liz, if there's anything else that you'd like to add to today, if I had to ask you, I'm going to ask you if you could use one word to describe this stage, what would it be?
Uncomfortable. I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, it's called unsettling, but yeah, just from beginning, yeah, from the even before the shift. I mean, like I said, back in 2011, it began just the discomfort, the ever growing discomfort. But uncomfortable encompasses a great deal, which is so yeah, it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
And again, we have to say it's different for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And
We all go different, go
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
different.
that's it's both the danger and comfort of reading about other people's, is one is there's a reassurance in some of what people go through. You're never going to go through it exactly the same way other people do. I recognize a great deal of Suzanne Siegel's experiences, but not all of them. The same thing with Jan Fraser, some of the experiences, but not all of them. So you, on one hand, you get some validation. On the other hand, you're kind of left alone with a lot of your own unique way it happens for you. Yeah.
That's
Right.
very good. And it has to be that way, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because our minds are, individuated, and and that's what's being undone. So of course it's not going to look exactly the same for everyone.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And we have to let go of the way that we think it's going to look, because that's part of letting go of control. Our expectations are
You don't have any
concepts.
control.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so Liz, thank you. I'm going to invite
Thank
everyone.
you for having me. Thank you very much.
It was an amazing session.
We're going to take ourselves off mute now, everyone, just to thank Liz. Thank you so much, Liz. And we hope you come
Thank
back
you so much, Liz.
Thank
It's been
Thank
wonderful.
you, Liz.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you so much. Liz. Thank you. Thank you.
Very
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Jane, love you.